The most talked about Pokemon heading into Regulation G is Terapagos. Now, this tiny little turtle has major potential in the metagame, especially because of its ability in its base form, its ability once it terrestrializes, and its overall stats once it terrestrializes as well. We will be going over everything you need to know about Terapagos today, along with a couple example sets if you are looking to try it out yourself. And to jump right into things, we start off as a tiny little baby turtle. When that tiny little baby turtle hits the field, it will always immediately turn into this turtle that you see in front of you right now, which is this middle form, I guess you can call it, or its main form, since that's the form you're always going to see it in more often than not. Now, what this Pokemon has is it has a busted ability, and that is Terra Shell. And Terra Shell basically is like multi-scale, only it's way, way, way better. And what it basically does is it takes any super effective any move going into you, and it makes them not very effective. So if it's a close combat, it's treated as not very effective. If it's a water spout, it's treated as not very effective. That is once you are at full HP. So if you're at full HP, that first attack going into you will always be treated as not very effective and get that 0.5 multiplier, which is really, really strong considering you're a mono normal type. So there's not that many things that naturally hit you anyways, but that first attack is just going to be 0.5. It's going to be incredible. It allows you to get the main concept of this Pokemon going, and that is actually Calm Mind. A lot of players right now are trying to set up the Calm Mind, right? You get an absolutely busted move in Terra Starstorm, and the concept of Terra Starstorm is when you are in this turtle form, it's a single target base 120 normal attack, and you know what? Still a decently strong attack, right? Base 120, normal. You have stats to somewhat back it up. 105 isn't the highest, but it's strong enough, right? To consider at least, you know what, you get a Calm Mind up. Even if you don't manage to get the Terra Starstorm is still perfectly fine. Now, where this actually opens up is actually on the terrestrialization of this Pokemon. Where this Pokemon becomes so insane is when you terrestrialize it. And just to showcase that on a little bit of a separate scale here, we're going to have, look at these stats, okay? You are now base 160 in HP, 105 attack, not that you're worried about the attack stat, but 110, 130, 110, 85. The speed doesn't change, right? But if you compare it over here, you basically get a massive boost to your HP, and you get a massive boost to your special attack as well. And both those things combined with the ability of the Terra Starstorm again is even stronger. Now Terra Starstorm switches from a normal type. It now becomes a stellar type attack. And that stellar type attack is neutral into everything. It is not resisted by anything. It is not nothing is immune to it. It is neutral into everything. And it also becomes a spread attack. So you are now hitting both of your opponent's Pokemon as opposed to one. So it's a very, very strong option. You get an incredible stat buff here in the 160 as well. It is absolutely massive. You're sticking around on the field for a little bit, a lot longer than you normally would with most other Pokemon. And right now, the whole goal of this game, as I kind of mentioned, is to keep this Pokemon alive. You are going to be playing the game of Protect the Queen a lot with this Pokemon. It is going to be one of your main terrestrialization targets. It is going to be your main piece of your team. Now, it is very good into the likes of Calyrex Shadow right now, since Calyrex Shadow likes to spam those ghost moves, and you are a normal type, and, you know, you just don't get hit by those moves. Now, you do go to Terra Stellar, so you remain a normal type, of course, but you can only Stellar Terra with this Pokemon, which isn't a bad thing, because when you add your coverage move, right, I'll just say Earth Power for now, we'll get into this more in a bit, but you had your coverage move, and that coverage move the first time, because you did Terra Stellar, there we go. Because you did Terra Stellar, you do get that first time boost from that Stellar Terra on that Earth Power, on your coverage move as well. And you just do incredible amounts of damage with this Pokemon if you can get the Calm Mind set up. So that's what the whole concept is. That's what most of these sets are going to showcase, how to get this Calm Mind up, how to make sure you are preserving this Pokemon for the longest, because it is going to be the life of your team. It is going to be the heart of your team. This is the Pokemon you are trying to protect. We see a lot of this Pokemon. We've seen it with Screens. We've seen it with Comfey. Regardless of what you pair it with, you're going to try and have something to keep this piece alive. Whether it's Pollen Puff Amoonguss, the Comfey with the Floral Healing. Regardless, let's jump into it. Now, there are two main items on this Pokemon, okay? And it is Covert Cloak and Leftovers. I would highly recommend trying out both. I think both are very, very strong. I have them separated of set 1 to be Covert Cloak and set 2 to be Leftovers. As the disclaimer with these guides end up always being, guys, you can feel free to cycle around. If you like set 2's EVs better and you want to put a Covert Cloak on it, by all means go ahead. If you like set 1's EVs better and you want to put Leftovers on it, still very, very valid. Go right ahead, right? You can always mix and match these things, and there's always room to play around. But like for right now, this is what you're going to see. This is basically the basic of Terapagos, right? It is going to be Transform 0, which we didn't even talk about in the opening. My apologies. But Transform 0, basically the turn you Terra, you are removing weather and you are removing terrain from the field. This is a one-time effect on the turn you actually decide to Terra. And that is really, really strong in front of the likes of Kyogre, in front of the likes of Koraidon, in front of the likes of Groudon, right? Just removing the weather in front of the likes of Rillaboom, just removing the weather, removing the terrain. Maybe you're removing the psychic terrain, so expanding force doesn't hit spread anymore, right? Doesn't hit as hard, they lose the psychic terrain, right? There's a lot of good things you can do with this ability if you can Terra at the right time. So you're going to see that ability be used a lot. Another reason to Terra, if getting 160 base HP and 130 base special attack on top of already strong defenses wasn't a good enough reason to Terra, you now have even more of a reason to Terra. Anyways, really, really strong. That, of course, is a one-time boost. But once again, we've already talked about Terra Starstorm. That is going to be your main move of choice here. 120, 100% accurate. I mean, sign me up. I don't know where else I would. Don't know where I need to fill in my application form, but I'll take it, right? Like, then you got your coverage move. Like I said, Earth Power is pretty strong. It's good for Incineroars. I've seen a lot of people try out Meteor Beam with Power Herb. I am not a huge fan of Meteor Beam with Power Herb. 1, you can miss the Meteor Beam. 2, then you're wasting your item, and I think having a Covert Cloak so you can't get parting shotted or or snarled down, right, is really, really good. Or Leftovers so you can heal up feels incredible, right? That feels really, really good to me, right? So I don't think I love Meteor Beam just simply because you have to change your item, and I wouldn't want to change my item from one of these two moves on my setup piece right now, right? You also get the likes of like Dazzling Gleam. I think you get, is it Shadow Ball as well? You get Scorching Sands, which is kind of cool, but there's nothing really that you would want, in my opinion. Nothing jumps off the field. Like, nothing jumps off the board to me as much as Earth Power does, right? And that is what I would suggest here. Now, you do get the options to not go with a coverage move, and you do have the options to maybe go with like a substitute, which I've seen some people try out, right? But I do think the coverage move is very, very strong, and it needs to be considered because of so many high-powered spread moves in the format. There is a lot of wide guard going around right now. And if I am only Terra Starstorm, and I play a wide guard user, my main piece of my team, since this is supposed to be the main piece of my team, is completely walled out if they preserve their wide guard user well. Now, granted, there's always going to be ways to get around that. However, I do like the option to say, you know what? Okay, go ahead and wide guard. At least I'll still do something here, right? And I think because of that, having that coverage move is really, really strong. Regardless of what you choose for it, it's probably just fine. Aura Sphere is funny as well. Maybe you're worried about King Gambit. Maybe King Gambit is amazing in this format. It's all right. King Gambit's around. I still think Earth Power is probably your most consistent coverage that you get. I would run with that. And then you just close it out with, like I said, that setup into Calm Mind and a Protect. And I'm going to be honest, guys. I am not the person to give you a spread for Terapagos. If you are looking for a well thought out spread, I probably cannot offer that right now. I do have some starting points for you guys that are definitely going to work out as a starting point, but definitely play around with them. Look into maybe fine-tuning a little bit more. However, I'm going to hit a couple benchmarks here, showcase these benchmarks in these sets, but feel free to play around with them and mix and match regardless of what you like. So this is one I went really, really basic on. And Terapagos is a weird Pokemon because naturally you have 160 HP. And naturally when you have 160 HP, you get more benefit of investing into lower defensive stats. I actually get bulkier if I invest in defense and special defense. However, it's a little bit weird on a Terapagos because if you look at Terapagos' base stats before you terrestrialize, your HP stat is actually lower. So it's a little bit of a weirder spot where you don't normally see too often. So fine-tuning what the correct HP number is here is very, very weird to me, and I had a little bit of trouble fine-tuning. So I went with basic, just max HP on the first one. It's great general bulk. It covers if you don't end up getting to Terra right away, right? Like if you want to preserve the Terra for later, you get a lot more bulk that way on your baby form, or your neutral form, I should say, right? It covers that. I went 52 speed because that hits 112. Now, depending on your speed stat, depending on the rest of your team, if you have the likes of Tailwind or a way to slow down opposing Pokemon, I would recommend this speed stat, because then Calyrex, Shadow, Scarf, Urshifu, when they're down to -2, or when you are at +2, if you decide to like Tailwind, right, you will be outpacing those pieces. And that feels really, really strong to me. That's the speed stat I would want to hit here. Now, granted, you can go up a little bit, right? And if you don't have speed control, you can probably go down a little bit as well. But something around this 112 speed stat, if you do have access to a speed control form, whether it's Icy Wind or Tailwind, I would not recommend going slower than 112. I think 112 is a very good benchmark to hit in that regard. The only issue here is there's going to be a lot of Pokemon in this format that are going to be sitting around this 112 mark, because that is the mark you need to outpace those Calyrex, Shadows, and Tailwind. So there's going to be a lot of Pokemon there. So maybe you mess around with it. You want to speed yourself up a little bit, perfectly understandable, right? But once again, like I said, I'm just looking for the benchmarks right now. After that, I gave you guys the second bump in special attack. Well, it's actually, it is the bump, right? Yeah, okay. I'm not crazy. I'm making sure I got the bump right, but it is the bump in that special attack. You are going to be getting that much more damage off. And the concept was, I'm not always getting a Calm Mind, right? Because a lot of people are going to say, oh, why don't you make yourself even? Now, I could do this as well. That's probably a little bit more valid, because then when you get the +1 Calm Mind, you're not rounding down on your odd number, right? So that's definitely valid, right? So maybe this is a little bit better. You know what? I'm going to send this. I like this a little bit better. But basically, 156 is probably the minimum I would go here. You want to be able to do enough damage without necessarily getting a Calm Mind off, because you're not always going to have a Calm Mind off. There's a lot in the metagame, whether you're running, right, whether it's Clear Smog that's going around right now, whether it's Snarl that's going around right now. In this case, you wouldn't care because you are Covert Cloak. But you want to be able to do damage before you have to get the Calm Mind up, right? Sometimes you just can't do it. You need to send damage. And having the option to actually send damage, really, really strong. You could go lower. I'm not a huge fan of going lower. I think 164, 156, 164, that's probably the lowest I would go on this Pokemon. Now, I could be very wrong. And then I just kind of dumped it into general bulk, right? You're more worried about physical stuff, because like all those fighting moves that you're worried about, like the close combats, the collision courses, they are all physical, right? They are physical. This is where you probably want to be putting that leftover bulk. Granted, it's not a lot in this case, but is it at the very least something. This is kind of the concept of Terapagos, right? This is the basic spread you're going to see, something similar along these lines. As I said, guys, play around with it. Now, I already mentioned the HP stat and how I think you probably want to find an optimal spot that's not 252 HP, because yes, it maximizes the normal form's bulk, but this form, it's very, very kind of counterintuitive, right? You're not really gaining a lot from investing in a 160 stat. So on set 2, I've attempted to fix that, right? I've put leftovers on this thing. I've dropped my HP to hit 256. Hitting 256 is the perfect leftovers recovery. I will always be gaining 16 points of health, and that is the most percentage of my HP that I will get back from that number. So I put 164 there. I now, once again, just kept that 156 over here. Once again, you can easily do this and do this. You can easily play around with it, but for the sake of this spread, I'll leave it at the 156 for now, right? And my entire defensive calc on this one was for Koraidon. Now, 164, 124 allows me to Terra in front of the Koraidon, remove their sun, and survive their collision course if the sun is gone, because they no longer get the boost from the sun, which I think is incredibly, incredibly strong, right? And that's kind of the way I sat with that. Now, obviously, Koraidon can just switch out and switch back in and completely blow you up because they got the sun back. That's understandable, but if you can play it right, this is a line you can play to, and that felt like a very strong benchmark to hit for me when I was looking at this Pokemon. Once again, hitting that 52 speed stat, this Pokemon feels incredible, right? And, you know, get Calm Mind, get your coverage move. Maybe you go Substitute. Still think Substitute is a valid option. Once again, though, I like having that coverage move. We've been over that before, right? Other than that, this is just kind of like a more refined spread from the first one, right? Like, I was trying to find that middle ground on the HP stat where it's still high enough to benefit the baby Terapagos, but it's still not crazy high that you're wasting EVs on the main form of the piece, like once you Terra. So, like, once again, play around with it, guys. There's a lot of room to play around with it, but if you're looking for a starting point, if you are looking for a benchmark on Terapagos, these are some of the benchmarks I've been highlighting, and I've probably said that 62 times with this with this video or this guide right now, but you know what? This is what Terapagos is. This is how you play it, and there's a lot of things we just don't know about Terapagos yet, right? We don't know what's optimal in HP. We don't know what the spreads are, right? But like this is probably a very good starting point, and I think it's an incredibly strong way to look at starting. Now, set 3 I don't have anything yet, and you might be asking why even show set 3 if you don't have anything. And here's where I want to explore other options, because set 1, set 2, they are entirely built to play that protect the queen game, the protect the queen mindset, and I'm going to preserve this piece. But what if I just said, you know what, this Pokemon is bulky enough on its own. This Pokemon has 130 special attack. What if I just said everybody's game plans against Terapagos is going to be to hinder me down, to whittle me down, right? But what if I just said I'm going to go crazy? And I'm just going to change their entire game plan into me. Right, if I have all of a sudden choice specs, I get to go Terra Starstorm for massive damage. We get to keep Earth Power here as well, right? We'll flip over to the special category and we get to see what we get to run, right? I mean, Dazzling Gleam is probably something you'd run. You get incredible coverage. You get Flamethrower, you get Ice Beam, you get Thunderbolt, right? There's all kinds of things you can put on this Pokemon. I like Ice Beam a ton, right? I don't know where you'd go from there. Thunderbolt is cool. Tri Attack is cool. Right, if you do Terra, you actually do get a Tri-Attack that's still single target. Maybe Weather Ball is something fun, but once again, Weather Ball seems counterintuitive because you are going for the Terra more often than not, right? And then you're going to remove the Weather, so that's kind of pointless. But Power Gem is cool, right? There's tons of coverage moves you get on this thing as well, on a potential choice specs. You are Terra Stellar, so if you have your coverage moves and you are specs, right, you can go walk in, boom, big Terra Starstorm. Switch out, come back in later, boom, big Terra Earth Power. Switch back out, come back in later, boom, big Ice Beam. Right? Now, granted, that's very unlikely that you're going to get a scenario where you're able to switch in and out 3 times and click three different moves. But the options are there, and I think Specs is very funny because of that. Right? So once again, you're going to go modest here. You're probably going to go up to about 236, which would be the next bump. Right? Probably chuck it into speed. I don't think you'd want to go all speed because 137 really doesn't hit much. But you're gonna find a speed stat you like, right? I know a lot of the faster Pokemon or the mid neutral ground Pokemon are sitting around like the 120, 121. So maybe you want to creep that, something hitting around like 125, right? Maybe depending on your speed control, you can play around with that. And then you're just gonna dump this into defenses for the lack of a better spot and lack of investment and lack of like me actually taking the time to look at where I would put these EVs on a spec set. I'm gonna throw it in HP. But once again, guys, you basically have 116. You can put them anywhere. I'm going to throw them in HP for the sake of throwing them in HP right now. But once again, I think this is an interesting concept that hasn't been explored enough. Now, granted, do I think set 1 and set 2 are by far the better way to approach playing Terapagos? Absolutely. Do I think set 3 is funny and may throw some game plans off? Also, absolutely. I think if the metagame shapes up the way the metagame slowly starts to shape up, specs could see creep in, but I wouldn't highly recommend it. I just think it was a cool concept that I would mention because I feel like if I didn't give you guys an offensive option, somebody was going to say, hey, what about an offensive option? Here are my thoughts on the offensive option. Okay, I think it's a very cool option. I think it's got some cool tools going for it where you just kind of start doing more damage immediately and you just play to that. Instead of the slow, calm mindset, you just play to, I'm going to use this thing as a sweeper. And it's a very interesting option. I'm not against it. I like the concept, but I do think set 1 and set 2, I would personally start with set 2. If I am starting somewhere, I would start with the set 2 moves, the set 2 spread, and then just maybe pick Covert Cloak or leftovers. Once again, if you switch back to Covert Cloak, maybe having the optimal lefties recovery is a bit useless, right? So once again, you can play around with that as well. Regardless, though, I'm going to stop rambling. Somehow this Terapagos guide went on for 18 minutes, or maybe 19 at this point. I don't even know. But it's been absolutely crazy. But with that, guys, like I said, going to stop rambling. If you do enjoy these types of guides, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe. It really does help out the channel. And, of course, I really do appreciate it. But with that, I'm going to get on out of here, and I will catch you all in a future video.